We're proud to partner with Bunker Hill Community College, powering Boston's future workforce through access, equity, and innovation in higher education. Thank you for supporting Rooted in the Future of Public Media. Click the link in the description or visit bhcc.edu to learn more.
Well, Sarah Amos, thanks so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to chat.
So, when did you know that this story of your father's legacy needed to be a podcast?
I wish I could say that I've always kind of known, but the reality is that I didn't really start to think about doing a podcast about my dad and our family and his legacy until he got really sick. And I think, as we go through in the back half of the podcast, you will hear the end of his life was really complicated. And there were a lot of struggles and there were a lot of things that I had to deal with, our family had to deal with, that he had to deal with. And I think as that all became a bit crazier and crazier, I started really to think about how I wanted to process it and how I wanted his legacy to be remembered by others. And I think only then did I start to really not just consider a podcast, but really for the first time ever consider talking about my father, his life, our relationship, what it all meant to me in a public way.
And what were some of the obstacles, both personally and just from a logistical standpoint, that you had to overcome to get to that point?
My father was one of the most charismatic, larger than life, incredible promoters that I have ever known and that I think most people who met had ever met. He was this presence who did this incredible thing in being a Black entrepreneur in a time where that didn't really exist. And I think it is very easy to remember that part of him and love that part of him. But he was also, a Black man born in 1936 in Tallahassee, Florida, who had a really complicated childhood and a really complicated set of traumas that affected the trajectory of his life for the rest of it. And so for me, dealing with the duality of those two people was something that I had unconsciously been grappling with probably since my 20s and just hadn't realized it. And so I think that was the biggest thing, right? Is I think for anyone who has generational trauma in their family, big or small, how you kind of come to terms with it and how you figure out how to take the good from your parents and the generations that came before and not necessarily repeat the bad is a constant struggle that everyone faces. For me, then layered on top of that, look, the reality is we talked about in the podcast, my dad was married 6 times to 5 different women. There was a lot of love in his life in a variety of
As they say,
ways.
Papa was a bit of a rolling stone.
He was quite the Rolling Stone at times. And with that dynamic came a lot of family. I have half brothers. I had and have lots of different stepmoms. There is a lot of family baggage, so to say. And in the later years of his life, as his fame had dwindled and his bad business decisions had really caught up with him, there was a lot of struggle that we had to deal with in terms of finances, in terms of health, and in terms of different people wanting a say as to how my dad was living his life. And as you'll hear in the podcast, the last wife, my stepmother and I, did not always see eye to eye on things. And a charged situation that really took over a lot of the end of his life.
Yes, that obviously is the most poignant part of the trailer, at least one of the most poignant parts. And it did make me wonder, like, what other sorts of pushback did you get from your family or others in your pursuit of doing that?
I was really lucky. And before I even started the podcast, I spoke to almost everyone in the family. I spoke to my mother. I spoke to all of my brothers, my best friend, my husband, my daughter. And I sat everyone down and I said, I'm thinking of doing this and I will only do it if I have your blessing. Doesn't mean you have to be involved, but I at least need to know that when I come out on the other side of this, we still have our connections as a family. I was really lucky that all of them were very, very supportive. In every family, there's a different set of dynamics. And I think one of the things that I tried to do in the podcast, and we'll see how successfully people feel I did it, is really give everyone a chance to say their piece or at least really examine their perspective. I think often with families, it is easy to see your point of view. And I really wanted to, with this, try to take a bit of a bird's eye view in my family, in my life, in my father's life, and really consider how other people saw a set of situations that had unfolded, right? My dad was this extremely charismatic man at the center of our family. And the fame and the money and the success and the failures and all of it that came with it revolved around him. And this was the first time we as a family sat down to really talk about that and figure out what that all really meant to each of us individually and therefore to us all collectively.
Think that this has healed your family?
I mean, you hear a little bit of it in the trailer and we'll get into it more. My husband, who, God bless him, pulled no punches, right? He does not like being in the spotlight, but he really came full force for this. Admits at the end of the trailer that perhaps I could benefit from therapy.
Yes. And did you ever go? Have you gone?
Spoiler alert, I am now seeing a therapist, which is...
Congrats to you.
Welcome
to the therapy club.
It's a great club. Look, and it's so funny. I said to someone recently, I think if I hadn't done this podcast, I would not be seeing a therapist. And I think that alone is a huge benefit. I am trying my best to be comfortable in the uncomfort of putting my life and my story and my dad's story out there. And I recognize that not everyone's going to love it and not everyone's going to agree with the things I say, the choices we made, how we perceive it all. But for me and my family, it has started a lot of conversations. It has brought my brothers and I, some of which I had been distant with for years, all much closer. In the later episodes, I really get into it with my mom. My mom and my dad were married for 30 years to varying degrees of success along the way. And I think when I started this podcast, I recognized that I would need to really go there with my relationship with my dad. I hadn't really considered that I would also have to do so with my mom. And I think our relationship has benefited from that greatly. So I think really just the fact that I'm talking more and that I am proud to tell people that my dad was Famous Amos. For so long, I really stayed away from that fact. It was the last thing I wanted anyone to know. And I think just being comfortable, being able to say it and talk about it and be proud of who my dad was and really acknowledge his accomplishments, which were so many more than I think I even realized when I started this. It's been a huge gift to me.
And for those who may not know, what were some of those accomplishments?
I mean, my dad was the first Black agent at William Morris, which in itself is really incredible, right? A talent agent who helped discover Simon and Garfunkel, worked with Sam Cooke, worked with the Supremes on a tour in their early days, and then pivots from the entertainment industry into cookies. And I think now there are so many different cookie companies out there, both in standalone stores and on shelves, that it feels very commonplace. But in 1975, he really was the first to consider even opening a store that sold nothing but cookies. David's Cookies, Mrs. Fields, all of the kind of fast snack shops that came after would not exist had my dad not taken a risk in March of 1975 and started Famous Amos Cookies, in which he promoted the company himself, the way in which he was essentially an influencer before that was a word.
When I walked downstairs tonight, the cookies were right on the desk. This bag says cute little bag, bag. Yes, it is. And then there was another one. Rhea had another one.
Sweet little sack.
Sweet little sack.
2.5 ounces. This is 7 ounces. You know.
Now listen, what does that go for in the stores?
This bag sells for about $2.50.
Yeah.
In some stores.
I have not ever had one of your cookies, to the best of my knowledge.
Oh God, no! Wait, we cannot continue. We cannot talk any longer because you know, I mean, we just can't. We can't possibly. And here I thought you were someone who did extensive research.
Well,
and you didn't need a cookie before I came on. Dennis.
All of that is really incredible. And then I think the other huge part of his legacy is his work with literacy. He was the spokesperson for Literacy Volunteers of America for 20 years, hosted children's programs to help kids learn how to read, worked very closely in adult literacy, right? Here, his real legacy, and I think the greatest accomplishment that he was always proud of, was how much he helped a generation of people understand the importance of literacy and not be ashamed to ask for help where they needed it.
Yes, and I understand he used to come and read at your school. Is that right?
He would do. I mean, look, the man loved an audience. Till the day he died, that man loved an audience. And yeah, so he would come and read at my school as a kid. He would go across the country, everywhere. Everywhere he went for promotional events, he would often find a way to do a literacy event there as well, which was really incredible. And, it's funny. I meet people sometimes, and when they find out who my dad is, of course, some people are like, oh, I love the cookies. But my favorite is sometimes I'll meet people and the first thing they'll say is, your dad taught me how to read. And that's real. That is real legacy. And I think as a kid and growing up, and especially in my 20s and 30s, I was so focused on his failures. And I think that's an easy thing for us all to get caught up on with others or ourselves, right? It's so easy to focus on the things we do wrong or the things that don't work or the things we wish we had done differently and had in comparison to others. And that makes it so easy to lose sight of the accomplishments and the things we were able to do. My dad had a GED, barely even had that, had no business experience. And the fact that he was able to start a brand that 50 years later is still on shelves, is still well known across the country and the world is really incredible.
Now, I read somewhere that over time, he didn't think the cookies were as good as they were when he first brought them to the market. Would you agree with that?
Look, I think the most ironic fact about me is that I actually don't like chocolate. So I have never been one to partake in the original recipe cookies anyways. I think when he started divesting himself of the company in order to keep it afloat and lost more and more control and then eventually lost control of the company entirely, it was really hard for him, not just in terms of what the cookie taste became, but how the company was being run, the decisions that were being made, right? It had been his baby for so long, and eventually it wasn't anymore. And I do think, the cookie tastes very different than that original cookie did that my dad made. There's no way around that fact, right? It is a shelf-stable cookie now. It is shipped around the world. It is a different cookie than was being made by hand by my dad and his employees in bakeries. But at the same time, had a lot of those changes not been made, the company wouldn't have been able to scale as successfully as it had. So I do think my dad was always great about not dwelling on the past or trying to change things that you couldn't. And I kind of look at the cookie recipe the same way. If you want a true homemade Famous Amos cookie, you're not going to get it in that package. You're going to have to come find me. I will make you some. They're quite delicious. Even though I don't eat them, I do make them. But yeah, it's a different cookie, and I think that's okay.
Fair enough. But we know where to go to find the secret family recipe.
Exactly. Just come to me. It is something I avoided making for a long time, but have gotten back into.
And Sarah, what do you think? I'm thinking about the person who is working in a Black-owned family business. What do you think are the lessons for them as they listen to this, or even just an entrepreneur in general?
Yeah, I think it's so important to surround yourself with the right people. So many of the mistakes my dad made in those early years were not trusting the right people. I think it's really easy. Look, let's be blunt. It's really easy sometimes for white entrepreneurs to succeed because they have come up in networks, in communities, and places where there is an abundance of mentors and experience and people they can learn from. My dad came up in a world where there was no one else he could really turn to in his family for advice. There was no one in his family who had gone to business school. His parents didn't even learn how to read until they were adults. So there wasn't quite that network of support that often comes in other communities. And I think that makes it so much more important to really find people who you can trust, people who can be your advocates, people who can be your mentors, who can be your teachers, and really listen to the advice they are giving. My father was an incredible promoter. He was a very bad businessman. And I think too often his talent in promotion made him forget that he should listen to people when it came to the business side of things. He thought he could do it all, and he couldn't. And I think that's the most important thing for anyone in a business to realize. No one can do it all. You need to find the right team. You need to trust the right people. And you really need to be able to listen to the advice and opinions that other people give you. If you try to succeed entirely on your own, you will almost always fail.
That's a word indeed. And Sarah, I'm also just thinking about, where I'm sure there's so much that you left out of the podcast. So are there more stories to tell about your family and about your father? And if so, will you be telling them?
I left so much out. As you listen to the podcast, you will hear in particular, my 3 brothers are incredible storytellers and all very, very different. And my best friend and I could have a running podcast just of insane stories we've had over the years. I have no idea if I will be telling more stories. I am so focused right now on just putting this out into the world and hopefully creating something that people are entertained by, maybe see a bit of their own family drama and experiences in, something that people can take away some lessons from. Where we go from there, who knows? But we did have to leave a lot on the cutting room floor. There's a lot of hijinks in my family. There's a lot of really crazy stories from my dad in the height of fame, from my brothers in dealing with the fame, and from me being a deeply embarrassed teenager, the father who wore a watermelon top hat and played a kazoo. So it was an endless set of material, and we have whittled it down to what I hope is 6 really compelling, heartfelt, funny episodes.
Well, we will certainly be looking forward to listening to them. And who knows, maybe one day your daughter will be telling the Sarah Amos story.
My daughter is very upset I didn't interview her for the podcast. Well, has strong thoughts about it as an 8-year-old. And so anyone who wants to hear part 2, just the my daughter story, please write in and let us know.
Absolutely. Well, Sarah Amos, host of Tough Cookie, a podcast about her father, Wally Amos of Famous Amos, thank you so very much.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been wonderful.
Bunker Hill Community College is inspiring dreams through academic excellence, community engagement, and workforce partnerships. Learn more at bhcc.edu.